Hello everybody, I'm just going to be giving a quick run through as to what MUN is, the different roles associated with it, and a couple of other things just before our conference begins. That'll be happening in January. So we kind of understand that there are a lot of schools who are first time to MUN, and there will also be a lot of delegates who will be first time to MUN coming. So just want to make sure that they're comfortable, they understand they kind of have an idea of what MUN actually entails, what you actually do at the conference, and therefore can also kind of participate a little bit more actively within our rooms to make sure that they kind of maximize the experience as well. So let's just have a quick flick to a PowerPoint. So I'm going to be doing a couple things today. We're going to be talking about what MUN actually is. We're going to be looking at the different roles in MUN. We're going to have a look at the different committees, what they do, the different kind of legal backgrounds, what they can actually do, the flow of debate within these committees, the motions which you can take up onto the floor, making speeches and specifically making good speeches as well, and being able to make sure that you're using the correct terminology, and then also how to make good resolutions and good amendments. So let's get started. So what actually is MUN? So MUN is basically a simulation of the actual United Nations. So the idea is that you get a country. That country can pretty much be any UN member state, like China, the US, Mexico, Canada. It could be pretty much anyone. And basically you have to go talk about global issues and maybe how they affect the United Nations, and kind of take your own country's stance, I suppose, to a certain extent on those issues. So it's pretty much just a public speaking event. You kind of get a lot of people at it who are very into politics and very into debating and that sort of thing. So that's kind of I suppose that's kind of the idea of MUN. It's yes, it is a simulation of the United Nations, but there's also kind of a big debate about these like pressing global issues and how we can actually sort them and figure them out as the United Nations, and how we kind of can cooperate on it as well. So within MUN, there are a couple of different roles. There's actually 5, but I decided to throw another one in here just to make sure people don't avoid, to avoid some confusion for some people. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the advisors. So the advisors are usually teachers. They are, if not, they're kind of adults, and they come to these conferences just to make sure that if any issue arises amongst the delegation or amongst the delegates, that they're actually able to make sure that there's someone there to talk to for our side, I suppose, that we can make sure that it can get sorted out as quickly and as fairly and properly as possible. The next row we have are the delegates. So these delegates are basically going to be doing the debating in the different committees on behalf of their delegation, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So we'll talk about now actually. Yeah. So delegation is basically literally just your country name. So you could be the delegation of France, the delegation of North Korea. You can pretty much be the delegation of any UN member state. And then on that delegation, there will be 7 delegates. So these delegates, you'll basically be assigned different committees based off different interests that they have, and they'll be called, I don't know, the delegate of France on H&Y, or on Stockholm, or the delegate of China on EcoSoc or whatever. So the next role that we have is the SecGen. You probably won't be seeing a lot of these during the conferences. We have 2 at our conference, but basically they make a speech at the during the conference. They don't they don't get involved in debates in the rooms. They're just to make sure that the room can run smoothly and the whole conference as a whole runs smoothly. And you'll probably see a little bit more of them at the end of the conference at the General Assembly. Now the next role that we have are the admin. These basically look after note passing and kind of jobs like that, and they will be from our own school, so there's no need to really worry about that. If you want to pass a note during committee, which you're absolutely able to do, it's kind of discouraged, but if like to talk, so you're not really encouraged to talk, you're kind of encouraged to send notes. So it is better to send notes rather than just talk to someone. So what you do is you write your note, you just hold it up in the sky, put your hand up with the note in it, and the admin will come across and take it from you and give it to whoever you want to give them to. So then you have the chairs. So in each room we're going to have 3 chairs, except for Security Council where we're only going to have 2. These basically shape the kind of the direction that the room's going. They kind of choose who's going to actually be speaking, who's going to be presenting the resolution and all that, and they're very much there to help you. So if you have any questions during the conference, make sure to talk to your chair, whether that be your head chair or one of the two co-chairs, which we also have. Just very quickly, I kind of forgot to mention, the vast majority of people watching this video, you'll probably be delegates. So we'll probably definitely not be admin, you'll not be the SecGen, you will not be a delegation because it's a bunch of people, and you might be a chair, you're probably not going to be a chair, and you're probably not going to be an advisor. So the majority of people who are taking part in the conference are your delegates, and they're the people who will be debating and kind of doing all that as well. So there is 6 different MUN committees. That is the Economic and Social Committee, which I think is great. I do a lot of that. I'm going to be head chairing that committee as well. You have your Special Politics and Decolonisation Committee, or SPECPOL, Disarmament and International Security Committee, DISEC, your Social, Cultural and Humanitarian Committee, or SOCUM, Ecology and Environment, or E&E, your Historical Committee, and you have the Security Council. So, what do these different committees do? Well, basically, there are 6 kind of committees here, and then Security Council. Security Council is a little bit different to these other committees. So I've personally never done Security Council, so I'm going to be talking specifically about these in the other cases. But if you do have any questions about Security Council, just make sure to email your chair email, which you'll be getting shortly. So ECOSOC, this is a committee that I'll be head chairing. It's basically a committee which kind of focuses obviously on economic matters and social matters. So, for example, things that have an issue with the economy, maybe if there was a recession, that we talked about there. So at our conference, we're going to have 3 different topics. That is the question of the economic impact of climate change on LEDCs, or lower economically developed countries. The question of cross-border cartel crime, which kind of goes in with the social element of ECOSOC. And the question of the establishment of trade blocks, which goes in with your economic element of the committee. Now the next one is SPECPOL. These basically deal with things like instability, war, kind of issues like that. So the 3 questions which they'll be talking about is the question of peacekeeping operations in post-colonial states, the question of the situation in Hong Kong, and the question of foreign influences in the Middle East. So the next committee is the Disarmament and International Security Committee, or DISEC. By the way, the vast majority of people just go by DISEC or SPECPOL or ECOSOC. You don't need to know the names, it really doesn't matter. Just know that you're in ECOSOC, you're in SPECPOL, you're in DISEC, you're in SOCUM, you're in E&E, Historical, or Security Council, it doesn't really matter. So DISEC, they talk about things like disarmament, obviously, a lot about nuclear energy and that sort, or well, nuclear power, I suppose, in terms of weapons. And at this conference, they'll be talking about the question of the growing influence of criminal organizations in Haiti, the question of the role of mining for precious materials in fueling conflict, and the question of artificial intelligence in warfare. SOCUM deals with kind of similar to ECOSOC, but deals mainly with this part, actually solely with this part pretty much. And yeah, I suppose they obviously deal with issues that affect people, in particular kind of vulnerable people. And at this conference, they'll be talking about the question of the use of bacteriophage to combat the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, the question of substance abuse amongst adolescents, and the question of the rise of political radicalization and xenophobia against migrant populations. This one here, E&E, or Ecology and Environment, obviously talk about things like climate change, things like climate refugees, those sort of issues that deal with the environment. So I'm just going to move in a little bit. So at our conference, they'll be talking about the question of drought and desertification in African nations, the question of the protection of the Thwaites Glacier, not sure if I pronounced that right, the question of the environmental consequences to overpopulation. Those are the 3 topics that they'll be dealing with. The historical committee is a little bit different. So this actually isn't a real committee, it's kind of one that is used in MUN. And the idea of it is basically to talk about things which have already happened from the perspective of when these things did happen. So for example, you can't, I don't know, talk about, artificial intelligence and using that to, end the Cold War or something, obviously, I don't know. really, I've never done this committee before myself, but the three topics that they'll be doing is the question of the US involvement in the Middle East based in 2002. That basically means you can't, use information or anything past 2002. Next one is the question of the partition of Germany from 1948. And the last one is the question of the Rwandan genocide in 1994. So the last committee, and arguably the most important committee, which is the Security Council. Now, I myself have never done it, but it's a little bit different. This is a legally binding committee, which basically means that decisions made within the Security Council, they have to be followed by the member states. There are 15 countries on the Security Council, these ones here, and of those, these 10 are elected by the General Assembly, and these they serve 2-year terms. These are the P5, so they basically are on it forever and they have veto powers. So it's a little bit different than these guys don't have veto powers, these guys do, these ones here. So the two questions that they'll be talking about is the question of the ongoing crisis in Myanmar and the question of the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea border situation. So, flow debate. So for the flow debate, that specifically talks about these 6 committees. That includes this historical down there. So this doesn't include Security Council because I think that is a little bit different. But if you do have any questions about Security Council, leave them down in the comments and we'll try and get back to you on that. So the flow of debate, basically at the beginning of the day, you'll have a roll call. This is very easy. You basically have all the countries which are supposed to be there. They'll go through in alphabetical order usually, and just to make sure that everyone's there. So if they call out your country, you just say present. You can say present or voting. You can say whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Then after this, the debate begins. So the main submitter of the resolution, which the chair has chosen, will get called up to the podium, and then they'll read part of their resolution. So this is decided by the chair. That could be the first 2 clauses, or the first 2 operative clauses, could be half of the first operative clause. It doesn't really matter. That's decided by the chair. So then after they begin that reading, the chair will allocate a certain amount of reading time to the resolution. This just means that you're able to kind of flick through the resolution, see what it's talking about. Is there anything dodgy in there? Is there anything you think that you could amend to make it a little bit better? And then they'll make a speech for the resolution, and they'll answer POIs if they want to. So basically what happens is the person will stop their speech, then the chair will ask them, they'll say, thank the delegate for the fine speech. Does the delegate open themselves up to any POIs? And they can answer 3 ways. They can say the delegate does not open themselves up to POIs, and then they can just sit down. Or they can say as many as time will allow, which basically means that they're opening themselves up to POIs, and then the chair will decide how many POIs are appropriate. So after this, after they've made their speech and after they've answered their POIs, they can then yield to another person. So this is basically kind of decided before they get up and start speaking. And this yield speech basically will be in support of the resolution. So a yield speech is basically like, I suppose if I'm finished speaking, I'll yield to like the delegate of Algeria if I want, and they'll get up and basically support what I say. Now they can take different points, but they're not going to go up and say this resolution is terrible because it just wouldn't make any sense. Because you want to yield to someone who's actually going to support you, and they do have to support you. If they don't, they will probably be told to sit down by the chair. So then we enter open debate. Now, open debate can be entered multiple times. The chair, you'll kind of know when the chair says it, it'll be the chair or the committee is now entered into open debate on this resolution as a whole. Any such speeches for or against the resolution or any amendments, please raise all placards now. That's basically what they're going to say. You raise up your placard if you're looking to speak. And these speeches can be for or against the resolution. That doesn't matter. You don't have to say whether you're for or against, and you can also yield after. So make sure that before even the roll call, or even I suppose with no passing, make sure that you have your yields ready. Usually people do a thing called a yield deal, which is basically where they can go and they'll say, right, you yield to me for everything and I'll back you up, and I'll yield to you for everything and and you'll just back me up. So that's kind of what's usually done. What else was I going to say? Yeah, as I mentioned, yields have to be in support of what the previous speaker said. Now, the next thing that can happen as well, if you don't want to be for or against, you can submit amendments. These will get you a lot of points if you even submit them. They tend to get you some points, and especially if they pass, they tend to be very, very valuable if you're looking to get an award. So an amendment basically can change the resolution slightly, or it could just change it drastically, I suppose. There's three types of amendments. There's a striking amendment, there's an addition of an amendment, and there is a changing amendment. So if you want to strike a certain element of the resolution, you can do that, and you can literally send an email to your chair saying strike clause 2 or strike clause 2 subclause, I or whatever, and or subclause B or whatever. That's usually the order it goes in. And yeah, I suppose that's one way of doing it. That doesn't tend to get you as many points as adding a clause. So this, or even changing a clause, which is, yeah, I suppose it says itself what it does. So what happens is, if you get recognised and you have an amendment, you basically say on your way up to the podium, would it be in order to speak on my amendment? Chair will usually say it will be in order. You get up, you read out your amendment, the floor will read it, you'll then argue for your amendment, and then you'll yield the floor to someone who will support the amendment. Now, obviously, you can also take POIs. Any speech that you actually make, I actually forgot to mention that, any speech that you make, even including yield speeches, they can all take POIs as well. But on this, you have to give a POI on solely the amendment. So if they, let's say, have an amendment to, I don't know, clause 4, let's say, you can't give a POI talking about clause 6 unless it does the exact same thing. Like, you can't argue about another issue if they're only talking about a specific aspect of the resolution that they want to change a little bit. So after this, there'll usually be a speech against, and it'll go on until the chair decides it's time to have a vote. And in this, you can vote for or against the resolution, or for or against the amendment as a whole. So not the resolution, just solely the amendment. If you think that the amendment will add to the resolution, you vote for it. And if you think it'll go against it, you vote against. If you think it'll take away from it, you vote against it. Now, after this, you'll usually enter into closed debate. Now, this is usually entered only once during the committees or the resolution session. You probably get through about 4 or 5 resolutions at least throughout the 2 days. So this, with this, you'll have a speech for or a speech against. The chair could ask for a speech for and against, but you can't submit any amendments. That's all it basically means. Sometimes you can yield from this, but the chair might say to please yield to the chair, and in that case, you do yield to the chair. I suppose just basic manners then. And then you're going to your voting procedure on the resolution as a whole. So do you think that the resolution, including any amendments that may have passed, is it a good thing? You vote for. Is it a bad thing? You vote against. Or if you don't know, or if you don't want to take a side, you will abstain from that as well. That is also an option. So there's also a couple of different motions that you can do, which kind of, I suppose, it kind of spice up what can actually be done on the floor as well. Here's kind of the main ones. So a motion to move directly into voting procedure kind of does what it says in the tin. If you're talking about an amendment and you think it's obviously going to fail, or you think it's obviously going to pass, then you can just shout out on the floor once no one is speaking, motion to move directly into voting procedure. If you agree with it, you shout second. If you disagree with it, you shout objection. And if the chair thinks that it's a good motion and that it will help the flow of debate, then they'll usually accept it and you'll just go straight into voting. You can also do this on a resolution. It doesn't really matter. It's basically to move directly into voting procedure on whatever you're currently talking about. So, which one we go for? We say a point of parliamentary procedure. This is basically a thing which you can shout when no one is talking, and it basically means that the chair, like, I don't know, a common one is a yield to second degree. So this basically means that someone has yielded to someone, they're not allowed to yield again. You're only allowed to get one yield per, I suppose, side of the speaking. So if the person who's already been yielded to decides to yield to someone else, that actually isn't allowed, and they'll say point of parliamentary procedure, is it in order for yields to go to the second degree or whatever, and the chair will say no, and then he or she will end up blocking it. The next one is point of personal privilege. This is kind of an easy one. It usually, unless you're doing it in a rude way, you don't actually need to you don't need to actually say it whilst no one else is speaking. But this basically means if you can't hear the speaker, you can ask them to maybe speak up. You say point of personal privilege would be in order for the speaker to speak a little bit louder, or if the room's very hot, or if it's very cold, or whatever. It's literally just to do with if you're a little bit uncomfortable, you can just say point of personal privilege could, like, I don't know, something be done or whatever. Next one is your right to reply. So this is given during a POI. Basically, if you think that their answer is unsatisfactory, you can basically, if your answer to your POI is unsatisfactory, you can say right to reply, and then they may grant it or they say not granted, and it means you can ask a question again, maybe a follow-up question. The main one, I suppose, is the point of information to the floor and the point of information to the chair, which are actually quite vague, I suppose, in what they're defined as in kind of what people do MUN. Point of information to the floor is usually about a factual error. So if someone gets up and says something like I don't know, Ireland is in Africa. If someone says Ireland is in Africa and therefore they should have a bigger say in this, you can just say point of information to the floor, and they've done their speech. Ireland is in fact not in Africa. It's basically, if they take a fact to be true and the fact isn't true, you can basically just say point of information to the floor. Can the floor please be made aware that Ireland is not in Africa, or whatever. Then a point of information to the chair. It's usually quite similar to this, I suppose. Like they're very similar. So point of information to the chair is usually like if there's a specific, if they kind of have a question. This is like when they know something's wrong with the parliamentary procedure, and this is if they want to ask the chair a question, whether that be about a topic or usually it's about the flow of the of debate and how it might, I don't know, be a little bit different to what they expect it to be. Or something like that. So this is usually phrased the question. This is something like you kind of done something slightly wrong, just so you know. So don't phrase it like that. But yeah. Switching MUN speeches and POIs. So MUN is very formal. I know people who do debating, they tend to be very kind of animated, and that's the whole idea. But MUN tends not to be like that, and it's kind of better not to end up like that. So you need to make sure that you're addressing people clearly and kind of in a kind way. You're not kind of belittling your opponents, which sometimes people can end up doing in debating in particular. So you open up your speech all the time with honourable chairs and fellow delegates, and you open up your POIs with, we would like to thank the delegate for their fine speech. That's kind of an idea of how formal it is, even if you disagree with them. You can say, we'd like to thank the delegate for their fine speech, but would the delegate agree that they're completely wrong about whatever, like, you know? So you just need to make sure that you're relatively formal and you're kind of very calm, I suppose, in your approach to making speeches and POIs. Like speeches, actually, POIs can be supportive or negative. So you could get up and say, we'd like to thank the delegate for their fine speech. Would the delegate agree that this is a great resolution? Like, you could say that. It's not going to get you a lot of points. But you could end up saying that if you wanted to. It does get you points, it just doesn't get you a lot of points, and you probably shouldn't do it that often because the chairs could end up freezing you just to make sure that the debate is kind of getting on and that they're not just repeating points. Another issue is you're just talking about yourself, so you're representing your country, you're not representing yourself, so you need to make sure that you say we instead of I. And you also refer to other people as in the plural as well. So stuff like they mentioned, it's nothing like he or she mentioned. It's always they mentioned, and we believe. It's not I believe. So it just make sure it's a small thing. The chair will pull you up on it. Usually not a big deal, but just try not to do it. And then also try and reference the resolution or amendment as much as possible. So talk about specific aspects. Maybe don't talk about the whole resolution's wrong, but go through like clause 1. The issue with clause 1 is clause 2. Whilst we believe it's a good idea, it has an issue here or whatever. So make sure that you're talking about the resolution rather than going up and making a speech about the topic, because that is pretty much what the resolution is actually supposed to do itself. So making resolutions and amendments in MUN is kind of the most difficult part, arguably. Um, so the difference between resolution and amendments, resolution is a whole list of things. So there's usually about 10 clauses within a resolution or 10 solutions within a resolution that actually fix an issue. And amendments are just one or two, well, yeah, pretty much one clause that it's fixing. Resolutions are made and sent in advance. Amendments can be made in advance. I'd actually recommend that you do make some in advance, just expecting what will end up coming up, but they're sent on the day because ultimately you don't know what other people's resolutions are going to look like. So in MUN debate resolutions and amendments to those resolutions. I've already kind of gone through that. So resolutions have two things. They have preambulatory clauses and operative clauses. So let's have a look at this quick resolution which I made a few months ago. It's for EcoFin, actually, which we don't have this conference. It was about the trade war between the US and China, and it was submitted by the Swiss Confederation. So you start all your resolutions like this: your committee, your topic, and who it's submitted by. Now you have here, you have your different, I suppose you have your preambulatory clauses. So it basically states different facts to do with the actual, with the resolution, or well, with the topic, sorry. So here we can see, knowing with deep concern the escalation and tensions that the Made in China 2050 plan may have, especially in the ideological side of the conflict. It's talking about a factual thing. It doesn't give a solution. It just says, well, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Usually don't tend to have that many of them. They're not debated during committee. So if someone gets up and says, well, this is actually incorrect because you just don't do that. Your child's here to sit down. They also have they have operative clauses. So there's usually about 10 of those. Here they only have 9. These are numbered, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And they also have they have to start with different words. So that's the same for this as well. So if we look here, we have noting with deep concern, recognizing, noting, and taking note. They're very similar. I made this very late. So here we have noting with deep concern, recognizing, noting. That was here somewhere, and the other one I can't remember, but takes note of, I think, was it? Yeah, taking note. So this basically, yeah, they're all here. You have to start it with this, and those words tend to be in just italic. Then for your operative clauses, or your operative phrases, they have to start with these words. So let's take the first one. We have endorses. That is here. Now, I actually don't think I was supposed to be allowed to use endorses just because it is Security Council terminology, but that doesn't matter. Your chairs will figure that out. That's really not that big of a deal. So, yeah, so you start that off. You have your, I don't know, number 1, and then you'll say accepts or whatever, and that will be underlined, and it will also be in italic. And then you go on to talk about what your solution is. These are done in one sentence. So you can see here there's no full stops. The only full stop in a resolution is at the very end, which is just here. They're just done as a continuous sentence.